manager here at PMG. I've been with the company for about 4 years now, and today I'm going to be joined by a panel of people, so it's a little bit different than how we typically set these things up, which is, it's one person presenting, but we're going to actually have a panel discussion with a few different SPMs. So a couple quick, there's my picture up there. If you haven't seen me, then, I am a handsome man. I've aged quite a bit since the last webinar we've given, but I aged well. But we'll get into the housekeeping. This is scheduled for 45 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and submit those questions. And if we'll try to get to those at the end of the time. If we run out of time, then we can get to those through email. We can follow up with you afterwards. And then also, if you don't happen to be able to listen and stay for the entire 45 minutes, or you want to take a look at it afterwards, then we will have the presentation up on the PMG side. You can download it and do whatever you need to. So a couple quick things. There's the PMG team that we're working with. Will be Adam Horstman. He's an SDM here at PMG, as well as Sara Brown and Aaron Klein. And looks like we're a little bit behind on the slides, guys. Sorry about that. But they will be talking about stories that they worked with their different clients and presenting the things that have happened there. And we've actually grouped the agenda into 3 different things. One is failure to launch. These are stories where you need to get the service catalog up and running, you need to get some services up and running. It wasn't kicking off for some reason. Something was slowing you down. You aren't sure why that happened, or you ran into some challenges. So we'll talk about those. We'll also talk about pitfalls to functionality. And this is where the catalog is implemented, but you aren't getting the value you thought you were going to get out of the services, right? You had this great agenda, you had this great project in place, and then it ended up, you're wondering what happened, right? The customers aren't happy, they aren't utilizing the tool enough. Let's talk about those challenges and ways to resolve them. And then finally, not reaching the full potential. And these will be stories where the catalog's implemented, maybe you rolled out 10 services and all of them are great, right? But then it stayed there, right? How can we get further services built out? How can we do process improvement? What are some of the challenges that happen when you encounter that? And then we'll do a nice little recap of that with the lessons learned. So we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, I have the panel here with Adam, Sara, and Aaron. They'll all be sharing different. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you guys, and we'll talk about that first grouping, which is failure to launch.
Yeah, Nick, I think I have a good example for relation to that. Hello, everyone. This is Aaron Klein. And I think one of the challenges that companies often run into in relation to failure to launch is when they get a bit too bogged down in exception management. I'm thinking of a client a little while back that was rolling out a new service. And they spent a few weeks building out the service and really built what in the end was a very elegant, very efficient solution to their business challenge. And they were doing the usual roadshow, showing it to the various end users, getting buy-in, et cetera. And on one of the visits, someone asked about a particular scenario and how it's going to be handled in the new process. And the answer was that that particular scenario was viewed as an exception and was going to be handled with the exception process that they put together, rather than the main part of the process. And the reaction was, no, that is absolutely unacceptable. This is a situation that comes up frequently. It's a big pain point for us. It has to be part of the core solution. So the team took that feedback, went back to the drawing board, and spent a couple more weeks essentially redesigning what they built so that it could accommodate this issue. In the end, they had a new solution. It wasn't as elegant, wasn't as efficient as the first one, but got the job done. So they were out road showing it again. And a senior leader now, who had seen the earlier version, saw the later version and said, what happened? What changed? And when they explained to him why they made the edits that they did, his reaction was, no, that's absurd. This is absolutely not the norm. This doesn't happen a lot. This is an exception. And basically, he pulled up data that showed it happened once every 6 months on average. So they had done a full redesign, changed things for what truly was a rare exception. Needless to say, they went back to the original version and rolled that out. And it's doing great, and it's beautiful and loved by all. So, when I think about this, I think there's really kind of 2 lessons learned here. One is don't build for the exceptions, right? Have a process that handles exceptions, but treat them as exceptions. It's kind of the old classic 80-20 rule, right? But I think there's also a second, kind of lesson learned here, and that get the data, get the facts. So people have different perceptions, people have different memories, people, are impacted by different things different way. And for that one individual, I'm sure it felt like a big pain point. The facts showed once every 6 months, and it was a rarity. So check the facts as well.
Aaron, that reminds me when we were talking about versions. Hi, everybody. This is Adam Horstman. Aaron was talking about different versions, and he's talking about different versions of a process. Of course, we're updating the catalog all the time, rolling out new features. So there's different versions of catalog. And a couple of years ago, we had a customer, or we implemented or announced actually expanded theming capabilities in the catalog. So basically, each customer will be able to go in and design their own sort of UI the way they want it, as opposed to having some sort of standard catch-all interface. So a lot of our customers got very excited. One in particular that I have worked closely with jumped on board, said, yeah, they love this, and they started immediately designing it and wanted to be able to implement it. So the product was developing as they're designing, as we're figuring out how it's going to be implemented, and came out beautiful. Took about a year, all in all, because of course we all do have day jobs that we're running around with. Implemented it, put it into their development environment, looked great, and then the plan was to go in about 2 weeks' time, put it into production. So at that time they said, all right, great, let's get our power users involved, let's get them to take a look, see what they think. So they got the power users involved, power users looked at it, and of course they had feedback, lots of it. A lot of it was very good, but they wanted some modifications changed. So basically it took about 6 more months to get all the modifications in, get the agreements on what it was going to be, what it was going to look like. So 6 months from when they thought it was going to go into production until it actually went into production. So make sure you get buy-in early. Make sure you do it, with all the other groups that are impacted by it. Talk to lots of people. More communication is always good. Get their buy-in early and get it often.
Yeah, buy-in is so key, right? You see it across the board all the time. And, it's not only getting that buy-in and getting it early, but making sure that you get it from everyone that you need to, right? Which is often the challenge, even figuring that out.
Oh, yeah.
I actually had a client fairly recently who was putting a new process in place where they were sending out an email to a vendor and getting emails back from that vendor, sharing information back and forth. And they actually had this pretty much, fully built out, ready to go, and they were just having a last discussion with the exchange team about the emails, and someone in the exchange team said, this is all great, but did security sign off on this? And everyone just froze, around the table. And they hadn't even thought about, speaking to security about it. So the information they were sending back and forth was employee information, employee names, home addresses, home phone numbers, etc. So they got security involved. Thankfully, security said, no, not a problem for what it's all about, etc., and they gave their blessing. But could have had a very different story, right? They could have put an end to the entire thing. So I agree that buy-in early is absolutely important, and identifying all of who those players are that you need the buy-in from, absolutely key.
Yeah, that's a great example of meeting all the right people to have buy-in. But something else that will really hamper the ability to launch a service in your catalog is identifying kind of a clear owner of your service catalog. This is a kind of a frequent point of issue at many companies because there are so many stakeholders in the catalog. Lots of IT departments, such as security, end-user services, application support, have skin in the game, and then you've got your business service owners who can all claim ownership of the catalog. But it's really important to identify a single point of contact. One example of where you can go really wrong without that person being involved is when you're bringing a new service to market in your catalog. An example of that, recently we developed a service for the sales team at this particular organization, and we worked kind of one-on-one with the sales team, defined requirements, built out the service. And in this particular service, one of the requirements, as is typical, is to get manager approval for the specific request. The specific requirement from the sales team is when they didn't have a clear manager identified in Active Directory, they wanted to let the requester identify their manager and route that particular request on to that person for approval. We complied and we built it as required, and we got all the way to end user testing when somebody from the security team and IT stepped in and said, you know what, we have a policy here at XYZ organization, and we have a standard approval module, and that doesn't allow for picking your own manager.
It's not name your own approval? Only Ben's going to approve for me?
It's not. So all good intentions to bring this particular service into the catalog in a timely manner were set aside, and we went back and updated this particular service to comply with the security policies and procedures at this company. That's one example of why it's so important to have a single person involved whenever you're bringing any particular service up into your catalog. Another example of this and why it's important is around coordination of services. So many of our companies have multiple groups bringing new services to market or maybe updating existing services. There might be an internal group. You might have a help desk that's been empowered to do kind of some break fix to your workflows, and then some of our customers engage with PMG to deliver services. And it has happened a couple times where lack of coordination between these teams caused us to kind of duplicate efforts and have a little bit of rework. So just can't stress enough the importance of having a single point of contact involved throughout the entire process.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, that's Adam and Aaron, all real good stories. You know, kind of the highlights that I take away from that is you go back to the old principle of the 80-20. You know, I think it applies to software development, to life in general, which is focusing on what the main business challenges are, what the norm practice is, finding a way to get that automation in place. Don't worry about the exceptions we have to build for them. Find a way to handle the exceptions, but don't necessarily rework your process in order to get the exceptions to run forward, right? I agree wholeheartedly with that. And then, but Adam, Sarah, you shared ideas that I think kind of have parallel thoughts. One is you want to involve as many people as you can, right? You want to get buy-in from teams that are going to be affected by the service. You want to talk to the end users, the super users, get their feedback to understand what they want to see out of what's being provided and the service that you're creating. But at the same time, you need a single ownership. And whether that's one person or a group of people, it's some type of governance that's in place for the catalog so that you don't have an IT team doing one thing, an HR team doing another thing, accounting team doing something else. They've all been trained on a tool. They're all building services. They're overlapping each other. There's no governance on what's getting into the tool and how it might impact other services. The other key thing about that is you may have already built a module, like an approval process. Use that across the entire board. Don't recreate things that you've already done once.
Yep.
So we'll jump from that. All good stories for having a successful launch and how to do so. Let's talk now about some of the pitfalls. So you rolled out the service, but it's not exactly where you thought it would be.
Sure. Pitfalls. Yeah, unfortunately they do come up, don't they? One that I see happen, unfortunately more often than I would like, is offering too many options. Right? We don't want the catalog to be the end-all and be-all, right? And solve all of the world's problems. And often clients end up trying to make it as flexible as possible, and in the end make it a little more complex than it needs to be, or more complex than it should be, frankly. Now, I have two clients who both do provisioning through the catalog. And it's almost a tale of two cities between the two of them. Very different approaches. For one of them, they are letting end users basically customize the service to the nth detail. So not only can you request the usual specifications, such as how many CPUs you want, how much RAM, etc., but every other aspect, things like operating system, or even which data center it's going to be in. And even more so, they're allowing the end users to change those selections through the life cycle of the request, right? And what this ends up doing is when you think of all the different options that they have on all of these different items and the possibilities for an end user to select different things, it's almost infinite variation that an end user can do through the life cycle of that selection of the server. And what ended up happening was that they simply couldn't test for all the possible scenarios. They'd have to spend a year in testing to cover them all. So they tested a few, and the ones that they thought would be the most frequently used, but of course Murphy's Law being what it was, when it actually went live, the ones that were being requested were not what scenarios that they had tested for. They couldn't test everything, and they were failing. So right off the bat, failures in production due to not being able to fully test across the board, due to the complexity, due to the number of options that they were offering. And I contrast that with my other client, who also, again, has server provisioning automated through the tool. And in their case, they're basically limiting the options the end user can select. So they've got kind of bronze, silver, and gold server releases. And frankly, the end users like that. They don't want to have to figure out every single detail of their servers. And because it's a more limited set of options, they were able to fully test, make sure it was working efficiently and effectively. And when they rolled it out in production, they had 0 issues. And they're spinning up servers in a matter of minutes or even seconds. So definitely, too many. This is kind of a time when too much is too much, right? And sometimes simpler is better.
Aaron, another pitfall we can fall into as we're delivering services in our catalog is automating bad processes. This can sometimes happen when you're on a timeline and you're trying to bring services to your organization, get it all under a single pane of glass and deliver them in a timely manner. But sometimes we can fall into the trap of not taking the time to dive into those processes and really analyze them and improve them. Recently, we implemented a particular request service. This was the security provisioning request, and it really was value added. We were taking away kind of the paper process where people were printing out a request form, filling it out, taking it to their manager, then they would scan it in and send it off to the help desk. So we were really providing some value. And we got this thing live and was really working well, but what we realized is we didn't really take advantage of all of our opportunities to eliminate those non-value added activities. In this case, we looked at it and said, okay, well, this is great. We're emailing the help desk, but they're turning around and typing that same information into their ticketing system. And we kind of missed an opportunity. One of the really big benefits to a service catalog is integration and eliminating the duplication of efforts that sometimes you see. So once we took another look at this, realized we could integrate. It wasn't going to be a big roadblock. We were able to eliminate, in this case, 4,000 instances a month of the help desk re-entering this particular request information into their help desk system. So we got there in the end. We delivered the value in the end, but taking the time up front to look at the business processes and identifying all your opportunities would have been key.
Yeah. It's really interesting to start here and discuss the different customer experiences and what customers are doing. And a lot of our customers are doing very similar things, and they tend to do them in very similar fashions, including some of the failures to launches and the pitfalls and things like that. Looking again at what Aaron talked about with too many service options, we had a customer that was, they built a brand new provisioning system. It was really, really nice UI, would provision across multiple systems, really complicated to use, way too many options, okay? So they decided they needed to simplify it a little bit, and they really couldn't do it because the way the UI had been coded in the provisioning system, it was going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. So they brought in PMG to act as a service catalog in the front end for that, as well as for all their other service catalog needs. And because they were pressed for time, they asked us to help them in configuring the forms and setting up the forms. So as we discussed the requirements, we didn't have all the history across the provisioning system and where they come from with their previous challenges, but they sent us the requirements and we started building them out. They basically wanted all of the new forms to look exactly like the forms that were almost impossible to use on the system that they had. So we put the first layouts in place, and of course we didn't know that. But we put the first layouts in place and had discussions and found out that the stakeholders and upper management were basically asking the same question: why does it have to be so complicated? Well, our engineers aren't even going to be able to order these things. I mean, there's just too many options. There's just too many things going on. So over some time, it took a while, but we eventually whittled it down to a simple form with, 2 or 3 options on it. You get instructions on how to fill out the form. Anybody could figure it out. Order them very, very easily. It's not a fixed type of system. I was reading an article this morning called about the paradox of choice, which was a book a gentleman wrote in 2004, which basically says you make people happier not by giving them more options, but by stripping away the needs you can. And when I read this morning, I said, boy, that fits right in with the webinar we're giving today. And let's not get hung up, make it as simple as possible for the end users and not get hung up too much on is it a service catalog, is it a request system, is it Gartner, is it ITIL, where are we going to go with this, what's the nomenclature? Just get stuff out there, talk to your users, make it user-friendly.
Yeah, I mean, user-friendly is key, right? Everything that we do, it needs to be user-friendly, it needs to be, focused on the process we're trying to solve, et cetera. You mentioned ITIL, and, let's be clear. I love ITIL. ITIL is great. I'm ITIL certified. I think most of us here in this room are ITIL certified. But sometimes people get too focused on things like ITIL and what is the terminology and what are the guidelines, et cetera, and lose sight of the end users. I have a client who, one individual in particular, that kind of is very ITIL focused. And you mentioned, service catalog versus request catalog. And they focus on those being two different things, 100%. And initially, they built their catalog out with that in mind. They said, no, ITIL says it needs to be separate, so it needs to be separate, right? So you need to go one place to get information about a service, such as, if you're looking for AV stuff, how AV works in the company and what the policies are, where support is, et cetera. And you need to go somewhere else completely different to actually request AV support. So, yeah, from ITIL, and technically, if you think about it that way, yeah, that's separate. But from an end-user point of view, not the most efficient thing in the world, right? And who are we helping in that regard? I'm very happy to say that this particular client, they kind of moved away from that, and they are now thinking more about the end-user experience, and they're combining their request catalog and service catalog into one. So end users can go one place to get their information and to make their request. So far more efficient, a much better interface, and much better for the end user experience.
Okay, so a better process overall for the user.
Exactly, exactly.
Talking about processes, the catalog is going to, rolling a service catalog that's integrated with lots of systems is going to do something that in and of itself is not necessarily a pitfall, but not being aware of it can be a big pitfall. That's showing that you might have some bad data or unclear or inefficient processes. Sarah touched on it with a process where they had to go in and modify it again. You'll be able to improve your process all the time. So when you get ready to roll out your catalog, you're going to expose yourself to bad data and inefficient processes. Be aware of it, because it will happen. We have a customer in the past year or so that built a bunch of nice set of services, very robust approval process. They integrated it across with several different systems. And the approval process is very straightforward. We're just going to send it to the manager. The manager is in the HR system. Will provide that system at a table, or provide that information at a table, and it will work great. So they launched the services. Individuals started ordering things, and the process broke down. And it was, wait a second, why did this process broke down? We've developed this process. We know what's in our systems. We know what we have, what we don't have. We've got all this information. Well, when we started looking at it in detail, we found out that this is a very, very large organization, but they had thousands and thousands of employees that didn't have a manager in their system, or it was an incorrect manager. People are moving, people are changing jobs. In an organization that size, there's things happening every day, and the systems may not be able to keep up, they may not be synchronized with each other, or something like that. So rather than go down and look at each individual system, what we said was, all right, let's take the catalog and see if there's anything we can do to the process itself, the approval process, to compensate for the bad data. So working with the customer, we added some self-healing steps to not only account for the bad data, but to also find the correct data and then be able to use that to correct the data that might be bad in other places. Okay? So the idea was find a way to modify it, keep the approval process moving forward. So make sure you are very aware that your integrated catalog will expose bad data. Be prepared for it. Be ready for it.
Yeah, that's a bad thing either, right?
No, it's good. As long as you can fix it.
Yep.
Get everything back in sync.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the challenge there is if you go in expecting, not knowing that this is going to happen, right? It's with anytime you're doing integration. It's probably got some consideration.
You'll get pushback from other departments within the organization saying, no, our data's
Yeah.
Again, look at the facts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, once again, a great stories. What was that? The paradox of what?
Paradox of choice.
Paradox of choice. Yeah, I think that is pretty key. It's the idea of, with the service catalog, you want a single pane of glass, one place to go where you can go and request your services, and it should be easy to be able to go and do that. And the other thing about your user base, some may want that ability to configure lots of different services. I think of like an architect or a IT engineer, they may want to have all those different variables you can put in when you're building out a server. But the marketing team that needs to spin up a web server or a promotion they're going to run, they don't need that. They need to have their standard practice, like have the T-shirt sizes, have those things along. They can make those requests. Some real good information there. I think Sarah, she pointed out, you don't want to implement bad processes, and it seems to me that timelines make you do that. If you don't take the time and review the process and making sure that you're putting in the right stuff into place, can really cause some issues. And what I take away from that is PMG Group, if you just think about the catalog itself, you're providing automation to multiple departments and multiple different users. You're almost consultants to the business, right? They've been doing this for X number of years a certain way, but now you have a way to automate it. Let's make sure that the process we put in is correct, and let's act as consultants and say, hey, we can streamline this, or we can automate this, or let's get this data from this location. Let's make sure we update all these systems so that they're all in sync. There's a lot of things that you can take into account when you're implementing a service catalog. So good stuff, yeah. All right, we'll jump from pitfalls, and now let's go to reaching your full potential, right? So this is where you've implemented the catalog, you got some services running, it was a great fanfare, and everybody's really excited, but then what happened, right? It didn't continue to grow, and you kind of stayed stagnant, or it became the tool for this service, and that's it. That's all people think of it as. So I'll open that up for discussion.
Yeah, one way to really kill your potential is to not maintain your catalog over time.
Oh, yeah.
As you're going through the launch of a service catalog, you typically have great organizational buy-in. You've got all of your SMEs, you've got all of your stakeholders, everybody's on deck to launch a successful catalog. You probably even have an internal project team working on this, building services to do so. And after you launch it, over time, budgets are tight, resources are tight, people go back to their day jobs, and typically the kind of ownership of the catalog gets handed off to one team, they get the help desk even. But I wanted to give you an example of something that can happen when you're not updating the catalog over time. Recently, at one of my client sites, we decided to implement the PMG Health Checker solution, which is a great set of reports that helps identify where you might have issues in your catalog, maybe some services that aren't performing optimally and might need some attention. Boy, we got information really quick out of that made us really realize that we needed to make some investment into maintaining some of these over time. Lots of stuff can happen in the business that would cause things over time to not work optimally in the catalog. You might switch out of business systems such as HR. You might upgrade your ITIL solution. You might change out Active Directory domains. Any of these little tweaks, big or small, can have ripple effects into your service catalog. In this particular case, one of the services we identified, we noticed that it was failing. And we went to the help desk and we said, hey, are you guys getting any reports that something's not quite right with the service? And they're like, yeah, we're opening and closing 100 trouble tickets every month when people aren't getting the email that their particular application request was provisioned. So these users would be calling up the help desk saying, hey, I asked for access to this system. I'm not really sure what happened. I've never got a password. And the help desk would be like, yeah, you actually have this access in here. Let me reset your password. Once we identified this, we were able to go into the workflow, make some tweaks, and eliminate all of those help desk tickets that were being opened. Just an example where a little bit of investment into the health and maintenance over time can really help your catalog reach its full potential and stay there.
Yeah. Sara talked about the catalog and the expansion of the catalog, so you can really get the full potential out of it. You know, you can design, configure, launch it, and forget it if you want. But you're not gonna, you know, there's no way to get the full potential out of it. I like to what I do and what our product does, and I like to tell them, you know, we're automating business processes, just as manufacturing companies over the years have automated their manufacturing process, like Henry Ford's assembly line versus the Tesla assembly line. You know, business process can use automation. That's what we're doing on a daily basis. And we modified the process that I just talked about a little while ago, you know, for bad data. Had we not been, you know, aware of putting time and effort into maintaining the catalog itself and updating it, you know, we might not have been able to do that. Another area to get that information from, as opposed to just the maintenance side and what might not be working or something like that, is actually from the customers themselves. I think I've talked about this, you know, customers on several of the things I've talked about today. One customer we have actually has built in a survey, an automated survey that goes out to every fifth submission into the catalog. So every 5 requests, every fifth request basically is sent to, they get an email with a link to an automated survey, and then go ahead and fill it out. And a couple of things that have come back from that for the customer is that people were responding and saying it sure was taking a long time to fulfill certain requests, and they saw that, well, the approval steps were basically a double step. They had to get the approval from the manager and from the manager's manager. And when they looked at how long it was taking, the managers were approving things rather quickly, but it took quite a while for a lot of the directors, who were quite busy, to be able to go in and approve things. So they had some internal discussions and decided, well, the directors really didn't need to approve everything. Let's just send notification to the directors for like 95% of the stuff. But 5% of the stuff, you know, they really do need to approve it. So it basically made some modifications to the workflow to notify the directors of those things, and those few things that they really needed their approval for, they went ahead and sent them an approval for. The other item that came up, the expansion of the catalog, came through the same survey method. Was HR had been submitting requests into the catalog primarily for IT items, and he then thought maybe it could be used for HR. So we went over and actually, you know, talked to the IT guys about what the catalog was doing and how they were using it, and realized they really used it in HR, because in HR they basically had a single master inbox where all the requests came in to HR, and a lot of it was just manual emails that people were sending. So they built some standardized requests. They put in some automatic routing so that things, instead of coming to the basically catch-all inbox, went to the specific HR group instead. So it basically automated a lot of their processes and reduced the amount of time they had, or they were spending on requests. And they continue to modify it. Over time, that HR group has become one of the bigger users and bigger implementer of services in the catalog. So always remember, talk to your users, get their feedback.
Yeah. I like this idea. I like the idea of getting customer feedback. And sometimes customers aren't who you would expect. As I think through my last story, maybe sending those surveys or querying the help desk. You don't usually think of them as a customer, but we could have identified those issues earlier if we were going straight to them.
That's true. Absolutely. Very good. All right. Good stories again. It kind of rounds out our third grouping of questions. And I really, Sarah, get a plug on the health check.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, it's understanding, you know, where things are failing, what's causing them to fail, identifying bottlenecks, and that's the idea. You know, processes change, right? I mean, what you implement today is not how a business is going to run 6 months, year to year from now, right? So you got to remember that. You got to be flexible. You're going to have to be able to adapt and update your services to reflect just as service making. You might be interacting with a different system, or your business process changes, or maybe you have a whole brand new offering that you're offering to your customers and you're implementing it through the tool. And, you know, you want to be able to make sure that you're continually updating your catalog and getting and checking with the process owner to make sure that you're doing those improvements. And the other key thing, you know, Adam, that you mentioned, is getting that customer feedback. Surveys are great. I like the idea of like every fifth person, or the thing on site would be whatever number, but extract that information, find out what kind of things people want to see in the tool. It's a great way for them to be able to give you feedback, as well as, build reports out of that. Okay, these are the things we're hearing from our customers. This is what they want us to implement. Let's find out what we should prioritize and what we should improve. So good story. So I think, that kind of rounds out all three groups. There's, some key things that I took away from each one of those sections that, listed here as well. I go back to the 80-20 rule. I try to live my life by it. I think we should try to implement catalogs by it, right? Focus on the 80% things that get the most amount of productivity and the most amount of work done. It's very key to limit number of services that an end user, options that end users can have when they're
give them all.
Give them everything they want. Yeah, and that makes sense. The idea is you have a single pane of glass, you have a one-stop shop, right? You want to be able to go in there, quickly order things you need, not have to have a lot of technical information to be able to order things for your business needs. And now that could be different when you have a different user group, but maybe that's different permissions too. Have certain services for certain users and different services for other servers and other services. And continually get that feedback. Always getting look at ways you can improve the process. Make sure that there's process owners and that they're in communication with that governance team, that single point of contact for the catalog or that group of people that are owning the catalog. And make sure there's continuous dialogue between the IT department or the group that's supporting the catalog and the business users that are using the tool. Whether that's a periodic thing, put something in place, put some things in place. I mean, it's amazing how important the RACI chart is, right? It's the idea of notifying somebody about something or approving somebody about having people approve stuff, all about the different services you're implementing. And that kind of handles the problem that Adam was bringing about. When you don't involve the security group, that's going to be a huge issue. Make sure you've done that. Those are all things that can be done as you're setting up your governance of the catalog. So, so great stuff there. I want to thank everybody for being able to join. We are running we're close. We started a little late, and we're getting close to it. And we got at least one question. Sarah, I'm going to throw this over to you because you gave the option about getting maintenance on the system. But how big of a service catalog? The question is, how big of a service catalog do you maintain post-launch?
So that could vary, right? Depending on the size of your service catalog and how big your organization is, that can really vary. I have a couple rules of thumb that I go by. One is, if you've got a service catalog that's out of production and you have a certain budget over time for building new services, putting new services in there, I always advise my customers to set aside 10% of those budgets for ongoing maintenance of existing services because they will need maintenance and support over time. Just a quick rule of thumb for budgeting. Another thing you can look at is how much you're investing into your help desk. So you probably have a tier 2 group of people that are addressing issues with the catalog. I would say a good rule of thumb is about 20% of either the people or the FTE or the amount of time people are spending addressing trouble tickets. Set that aside for improving and enhancing existing services. If you can spend 20% of those people's time doing that, you'll find that the actual issues that are being reported with your catalog over time will actually go down, so about 20%.
Yeah, pushing pain back to the source, right? Finding out what the issue is and finding a way to resolve it. Instead of just, 500 tickets getting answered, isn't that great? Let's
Fixing the problem is better than adding people to the help desk.
Well, all right. Well, we're at 1:45 Eastern, so we're at the end of 45 minutes. I want to thank the panel here for joining. I want to thank everybody who joined our webinar. Thank you. Hopefully it was informative. I think there's some really good stories here. Once again, all these were success stories, right? There's kind of bumps in the road that we've all hit along the way we're doing implementations, and I think it's good to share with our potential clients and current clients so we don't trip over the same stuff twice, right? All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.